already recording.
Okay, good.
Okay, so hop up for me. And can you,
You want to see my hairy legs?
I do.
You got it.
I want to see your feet.
There we go. We should like make these into real hands.
So I usually have people take their hands as wide as the foot bar because I feel like that allows for greater success in terms of scapular stability. And I'm gonna set her up in how I set people up when they're first doing this, not in like the full, what I would expect over time, but I always have people come forward first. So shoulders just behind the wrists, and then I can help them organize, right? The shoulder blade, rib cage situation, and it also gives them a little bit more leeway in the legs. So I use my hands under the collarbones to lift, right? Or I grab onto their shirt and tell them to pick up. You know my ponytail, that's my favorite too. But this is a good one. Or to just feel like they're pulling the sternum up through the shoulder blades, right? Just making sure that doesn't create roundness for them. So, and then sometimes my hands just live here. I'm sorry my back is to you, ladies. I'll change position in a second. But I'm like this. So I'm awfully close to her. I'm not doing this. Right? So I'm like, hi. Yeah. And then the rib cage placement is hands on the ribs. Yeah, so she can breathe into my hands. Yeah, and I can make sure they're lifted up. And then you can come around like this, the heel of the hand, and you don't move your hips, but just using this as they go through the exercise. So if you go ahead and go out and in a few times, and do it poorly, let the body shift towards me when you bring your legs in. Yeah, we don't want that, right? So I use my hands actually to draw her back and keep her back. So if you start to come forward, she can feel like, no, don't go there.
Like
Yeah, so I give her some really clear feedback in terms of where I want her to stay. And then from this place, I can also help her externally rotate her arm bones. And then sometimes if they're having a hard time finding that connection between humerus and shoulder blade, I'll take my hand on the shoulder blade, my hand on the arm bone, and I'll just have them feel the hug of those two coming together, right? So they're hugging back. And then sometimes I'm like this, really pressing, I'm pressing in and I'm drawing the ribs back because this for me is the, like, I want this to be organized and then I can worry about all of that. Head and neck are long, sides of the throat are lifted. So either lifting from the ears, right? Lifting from the sides of the throat, lifting from the ponytail. If this is well organized, then I can have her just keep the carriage still, but shift the weight back as far as you can go over the heels. And see if you can really feel the narrowing of the two front hip bones. Yeah, and then widen here a little. That's it. So keep that really broad. So then she can go back, but then it's like I've set her up well, and then I let her go back only as far as this can be maintained, right? And then we can talk about feeling the ASIS narrowing to pull into the deep lower abdominals. So she uses her exhale to come in, inhale to press out, filling up around the kidneys, exhaling to come in. Good, inhale to go out. And I say that when you come in, your heels get so heavy that your toes float up. So I used to set people up with the toes up. I just feel like that's one more thing for them to do and track and be concerned with, and it's too much. So I try to get them to just feel, now keep the toes up. Yeah. And then I can say, you know, if she's doing anything funky with her feet, like look at your feet, I can have her, you know, root through the base of the big toe, root through the outer edge of the foot. Imagine magnets between the ankle bones, because a lot of times people are falling outward here. She doesn't need it, but we could also talk about that internal spiral of the leg bone, right? And the widening of the sit bones.
Where am I going?
You're just going out and in. One way that I help to create some feedback for pelvic stability is the heel of my hand right on the sacrum. So she goes out, and exhale, she comes in. And I'm actually pushing down and pushing back towards the wall. Yeah, but without letting this collapse, so staying wide through the lower ribs. So that's a tricky connection, right? It's as soon as people go anterior, they want to drop their ribs in. So, and I, as many of you know, am not a proponent of cueing the ribs to knit together. I don't like that. I don't feel it's particularly useful long term. I mean, maybe I'll use it if somebody's not, like if they're proprioceptively not very strong, I might use that just to get them to come into it, but I don't typically. I would just say, you know, really widen the back, use the breath. So this has to be maintained while the sit bones are lifting and wide. So exhale and pull in. Yeah, so that's really challenging to do, maintain the balance between those two things. And I think that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Because you mentioned something yesterday, and I like it, and I think this might be why you don't like this, but I love it. So I want to understand why you don't prefer it over the long run.
Yeah.
But when you know,
Exhale.
I feel like when I can kind of get there when I use my breath, but I feel like I'm really immediate when I narrow in there. So, and I have been using that, so
I don't think it's bad. It's just not what I prefer, because in my own body, my experience is somebody telling me to knit my ribs together all the time, and that just feels very one-dimensional, and it doesn't really address what my ribs are doing or bringing awareness to me in terms of rib placement, which is almost always the bigger issue, I think, in a body, rather than just strengthening. That's the rectus, and that's the obliques, the external obliques that are doing that, and I feel like that gets overly strong, and then it's not really bringing balance, right? It's like it's just now bringing strength to this, but then that pulls down on the pecs. You know, it just doesn't feel, I mean, occasionally, yes, and like sometimes if you feel like they're not getting it.
Or what if you have that?
I think it probably depends on the body.
Sure.
What if you have that diastasis recti?
Yeah, that's interesting, because we're going to talk about that next.
I have one more thing about the knitting together. In my own body, I feel like that means I can't breathe.
Oh, okay.
So like I don't use that cue because it feels like it's like a locking down, not simply just a softening down.
Yeah.
Which I feel like I was doing Pilates maybe for 2 years before I felt that softening down.
Yeah.
And I don't like that feeling of
Pulling
like I
down.
don't know where to take the breath from there.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if it because it feels awesome to me, and that took me forever because I'm a hyperextender through there. So I'm just, and neither of you look like hyperextenders. Like, I mean, I'm sure
But I am.
Yeah, but I just wonder if maybe it has to do with body type.
Yeah, I think anything that I say, you should know not to make a rule of it. And just take it as like, sometimes it is going to be relevant and sometimes it won't be. Let's do round back.
Yeah.
Isn't that a bad?
Well, it feels good to think about that.
Do you ever cue the, are you saying you don't use the word knit the ribs, or do you never cue the ribs? I just didn't understand.
I do cue the ribs. I usually go Trinity's route and just think soften the ribs downward. I'm a much bigger proponent of trying to get some movement in the posterior part of the rib cage to facilitate that naturally happening. So it's like, it's the bony position rather than the muscle position.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify what you were saying.
Definitely cue the ribs, definitely talking about them. Typically don't say, like, knit the ribs together.
I have a hard time because
It's more forceful.
we'll talk about this.
Yeah, we can extend the conversation. Okay, so flat back, then to round back and curl. So here, I don't want that to happen, what just happened. So flat back. So what she did was she shifted her weight back and then curled. I feel like that's kind of taking the easy way out. So flat back, and then go ahead and go into, think of even curling from the head and the tail, so that all you're really doing is lifting the waist upward. Doesn't that feel harder?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then the hands-on cue is, for me, the whole arm wrapped around, and then I go like this, and I guide, right? Or I go like this, or I have them tuck the head, or I use I'll stand over here for a second. I go like this with my other hand to broaden the shoulder blades, but I keep lifting. And not so much that it feels uncomfortable, but it's really clear what I'm asking the body to do. And then I talked about, rather than the hinge point being the hips, the hinge point is now like at the lower ribs. So she presses out on the inhale. And then as she exhales, it's like stretching the flesh of the back. Yeah, inhale out without losing it. Or it's like drawing the tailbone and sacrum away from the ribs. So there's this real long quality, right, that I'm going for. And so she's shifting back just a little bit over her heels because that's easier. Scoot forward. And how I learned this is shoulders, like head over the springs, which is even harder to do. And it would be okay, in my opinion, to give the butt a little bit of something to do
What
here.
about her hyperextended elbows?
Yeah, well, yeah, I know Vicki enough that I'm not going to badger her about that. And it's just not that important to me right in the moment. I mean, it might be, over time. We've worked on it before.
I'm just saying, well, how would you cue it to correct it?
What I do
Soften-
with the
soften the elbows.
hyperextended elbows is to really strengthen all the muscles of the arm and then bend the elbows slightly without losing any of the strength. That's how I cue it for knees and elbows. Okay, beautiful.
A question.
Yes.
Okay, so let's say that you have an older man and you're teaching him elephant, and he has that rounded thoracic spine, kind of that slump, and you're trying to teach him flat back, but he has that roundedness. What kind of cues could you use to help him so that he is able to level the back so that it's one long line?
Well, one thing that I use is I talk about, like, you have a bungee from your sternum, and the bungee's attached to the wall in front of you, right? So they're really lifting the heart up. And then just have him shift really far forward, so it's almost like quadruped-like.
Okay.
And then whatever you would do, you would work it in quadruped, I imagine, quite a bit, right through cat-cow, and finding a little bit more of thoracic extension, and then use those words and those hands-on cues in elephant. So he has some benchmarks. Yeah. Okay, let's hop up. You've got